So thank you for joining us. This is our fourth LCAP meeting for this cycle, and we will be discussing the end of year budget or excuse me, second interim budget update, as well as discussing potential carryover funds and having a roundtable conversation about that. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can start with the presentation. So again, with our LCAP, the goal with the LCAP is to address these 8 state priorities. We're tasked with creating a plan that allows us to facilitate and move in the direction of improving these services that we provide our students. Our own Burbank Unified local goals are also the big driver of our LCAP. And this is how we categorize our action items and the metrics that we look at as far as meeting and providing services to move forward with these 4 goals. The supplemental funds, which are used within the LCAP to drive the plan, are generated by the enrollment we have in these unduplicated pupil groups. So in previous meetings, we've gone in more detail, but just wanted to highlight, again, where these numbers were at census day for our district and the different categories of students that generate these funds and that we need to try to address the needs of with our LCAP plan. So those subgroups include socially economically disadvantaged students, foster youth, homeless, and our English learner populations. You can see that in the last couple of years, we were on a downward trend with our enrollment in general, but also our enrollment with these students that meet these subgroups. But we've seen a slight rebound this year. And some additional good news is that we've also seen a slight increase since the time we pulled this data for Census Day. So our numbers have actually increased to this date at this point in the year. And we're hoping that trend will hold or continue for next year. So tonight we're going to go over the 4 LCAP goals. We're going to focus on the first 3 because those are the ones that we have specific action items for. And we're going to give an update on where we are with our budgeting and our estimated actuals at second interim for how much we've spent on each of those action items. So beginning with goal 1, you can see in previous slides or previous presentations, we've gone over the budgeted expenditure and the first interim numbers. Tonight, we're looking specifically at these second interim numbers at this point in the year. We will have final estimated actuals that we will go over in May when we do our town hall with the Board of Education and prior to when we actually submit and approve the LCAP plan for our district. But this is where we are at this point in the year. And you can see the action items that are contributing towards meeting our goal number 1, and a little bit of variance in these action items from our budgeted number to where we were in first interim. In most cases, if there's variance in the amount, it's due to changes in staffing, vacancies, or open positions that are still unfilled, or the need to provide sub-coverage or substitute positions or personnel if somebody in one of these positions is on leave or had to take extended time. So just looking specifically at this slide, we've seen a little bit of a decrease in the amount of spending on our instructional assistants, as well as the second to last item there, secondary designated ELD teachers. That line item also includes instructional assistants for SEDI classes, and those positions have been very difficult to fill. So we've had some of those positions remain vacant throughout the year. And most likely at this point in the year will not be filled with the 2 months left of school, but we have done some recent hiring, so that's why you would see a discrepancy there from what we budgeted to where we are today. This next slide, a list of action items. Wanted to highlight that our elementary summer school extended learning for English learners, we hope to be able to fund that through grant monies this year. And so when we get to our last meeting with the town hall meeting that I mentioned earlier, we're hoping that we can zero that out as far as an expenditure and allow that money to carry over, since there's the opportunity to use grant monies to fund that action item. Everything else has remained pretty consistent. That professional development, big cost has all been spent as that was used during our pre-service week before the school year started. Again, for the most part, these items have stayed pretty consistent across the board. Some increase in some areas where we may have had to provide leave pay or sick pay and substitutes to cover these positions. We may have also had a change in personnel where somebody was hired with more experience or higher ranking on our step and ladder or pay scale. You'll see that our English learner baseline program, this is sort of the minimum program that we need as a district to support our English learners, has fluctuated a little bit from the budgeted item first interim to where we are today. So we hope we land pretty close to where we were when we budgeted that item. The last slide here for goal 1. We have a few action items to look at, and specifically the last one, secondary summer school stipends for credit recovery. That item was put into place during the pandemic to recruit teachers for summer school. It's been necessary since, and that item gets split. Most of our summer school items get split between last year and this year because summer school transcends the fiscal year for our school district when it carries through from June to July. So some of those dollars were used for last year's summer school, and some of them will be used for this upcoming year summer school. Any questions about any of the action items in goal 1? We have Sharon Caseo, Peter Knappich, or John Paramo that could respond to any of those. If you do have questions, please put those into the chat. We'd like to capture those questions so that we can include them in our final plan. Seeing none, I'm going to move ahead to our goal 2 and give an update on where we are with our expenditures for those items. So goal 2 actions. Again, you can see the outline here of the action, the budgeted amount, where we were at first interim around November, and where we are at the time of March. And again, we've seen an increase here in high school counselors, and that was due to what I referenced earlier, where we've had some necessary leaves for our faculty. And we've been able to cover those positions to make sure all students have access to the appropriate number of counselors at those sites. Our high school assistant principal has remained lower than budgeted for this year. And then everything else looks pretty consistent with what we planned. Again, if you have questions about any of these items, we have looked at them in previous presentations, but we're happy to take any tonight. Next group of action items in regards to goal 2 is our again, our secondary online credit recovery that supports our summer school programs as well as our John, can you specify on that? Is that just summer school, or does that include some of the costs incurred with during the school year for credit recovery?
No, those are strictly for summer.
Okay.
There are separate funds for classes to be taken during the regular school year for credit recovery, or in some situations, initial credit.
That's correct. And we'll need to update that item or double check the LCAP, because our classes for credit recovery will not be online this year. They'll be all in person, but those same funds will be used to fund those that program.
Yeah, so credit recovery during the regular school year we are trying to provide opportunities for kids who may need to recover credit and want to do that after school hours. So it could be after school, a couple days out of the week, to work on recovering credit using the Apex platform after school.
See, our secondary at-risk intervention specialist has come in slightly lower than what we had budgeted. Our costs for PBIS training have increased this year. That's a contract we have with LACO, and the cost of that has increased since the pandemic and when we were in distance learning. So that's for the reason for that increase. And everything else looks somewhat consistent. Our homeless foster at-risk youth specialist also some savings there with the personnel in that position. So we're going to move to goal 3.
Robin, before I move on,
Yeah.
there was a question in the chat about
Oh, sorry.
how do we pay for credit recovery during the school year?
So for classes that are initial credit during the regular school year, they're paid for out of the, I'm trying to remember the name of the grant. It's the UC A through G grant. In terms of credit recovery, we have some of the one-time funding that is covering those classes, and I can't remember the acronym. Peter, if you can help me. I don't know if it's the...
It's like you said, we call it the A through G grant. And it just by coincidence, I signed off on some time accounting forms today in relationship to that. So, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
So going on to goal 3. Follow-up question. Will there be an A through G grant next year?
Yes.
Goal 3 action items. This is a lot of the work we're doing in regards to diversity, equity, inclusion. These have all remained pretty consistent. The DEI site lead stipends and collaboration time is specific to our own staff that are leading this work at their sites, allowing them release time to work together in that collaboration, but also giving them a stipend because of the extra duties involved with being a lead at their site. And then looks like there's still some more questions about A through G grant that we can touch on offline. So the primary purpose of tonight's meeting, in addition to providing an update with where we are budget-wise, is to start to anticipate what the budget will look like for next year. Main reason for that is we can start to do some calculations on what we can anticipate for carryover funds, as that drives some of the decisions we're able to make in regards to what the plan will look like for next year. So just a reminder of the parameters when it comes to carryover is that we're in currently year 2 of a 3-year plan. So next year will be year 3. At the next year's work will be to revise the plan going forward. And the first year of the new plan will take place in 24-25. But in the current state of the plan, there's not a lot of revision that can be made to the plan. It needs to stay consistent and have continuity over the course of the 3 years, including next year. So some of the things we have to consider is that we're not able to delete or change many of the wording from last year. We can delete a goal. We can add action items due to additional funds such as carryover, as long as it supports one of our current goals. We're not able to add a new goal based on our plan. We wouldn't be able to do that until the end of the 3-year cycle. We can revise a action item, but we need to provide a reason for the revision and any change to that budget. Lastly, it's not feasible to add new positions as this funding is not ongoing, as the variance usually is with carryover funds, and carryover funds are not on ongoing funds. So just to give a snapshot of what we anticipate, and again, these are second interim numbers, so these are not final, but it's a good prediction of what we think we're going to have at the conclusion of this year going into next year. So our previous carryover was 3,265,474. That's the carryover that was really from the previous 2 years combined that we had, and we'll close the books on, or excuse me, close the books in that year. So that was what we started with this year. We spent some of that down based on our revenues and our expenditures for this year. So this year's revenues were 10,449,853. At this point in the year, second interim, our estimated expenditures are going to total 12,082,942. So that's going to take a chunk of money out of our carryover that we had previous and leave us with $1,632,385 of carryover to be used in next year's plan. So taking that carryover and starting with that as our carryover funds for next year, we start with that same number of 1.6 million, and we are anticipating revenues of 10,270,083. That gives us not quite what we need if we were to continue all of our action items that we currently have. Reason is our estimated expenditures will increase next year with step and ladder, potential increase in benefits. So our fiscal team has estimated that our current plan expenditures would cost us $12,304,006 next year. So that puts us in a slight deficit of $400,000 approximately. So again, just making sure this is clear, with the carryover that we have and our anticipated revenues, if we keep everything that we currently have as far as action items in our LCAP, and accounting for the increase of costs for those action items, we're going to be a little bit overspending what we anticipate we'll have in revenues. So just as a reminder, from previous meetings, we had been generating some ideas of some areas of growth or areas of need, things that we should or could consider for our LCAP. Those areas include support for CTE pathways. This is a high priority for us because this also generates grant money funds for the district. The good news with this action item is we can use general funds to fund this action. So it's not going to eat into our supplemental budget, but it does need to be added to the plan so that we can increase those other grant dollars or sustain what we currently have. The other two items, orientation support or additional sections to reduce class size for SDI classes. What we'd like to do with those is, since those have been discussed or brought up, is to make sure that we fully fund any current action items in our LCAP that support or are parallel to what those action items are. And so that would look like our ELD teachers and our instructional aides that support SDI classes in our EL population, to really make sure that those are action items that receive the same amount of funding and are fully funded for next year. But it would be difficult to add those with the budget that we're anticipating. The last additional idea that had been brought up previously was online reading support. And this is a program that came out of our special ed department, our assistive technology. We saw a lot of potential benefit for our English learners with this program. So this may be something that we need to look at other funds, potentially not LCAP funds, to be able to provide this to our students. So I do want to open it up to some questions or any comments in the chat about any of these ideas, any of our action items that are in the plan that we just looked at, the costs associated, and also just the budget or our anticipated budget and expenditures for next year.
Robin, do we have the capability of letting our two people?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So if you'd like to come off mute, because I know it's not as easy to ask questions through the chat, you're welcome to do so. This should be a back and forth discussion tonight. Yes. Go ahead, Carolyn.
In prior presentations, one of the line items was DEI materials. And if we have funds and can increase that at all, I understand that the curriculum specialists made a list of books that they recommended for the elementary schools, and a lot of elementary schools are interested in expanding their libraries. And I was wondering if any extra money could be put in that column.
I think we can certainly acknowledge that by writing it down and looking at what funding we have to see if we can supplement
Yeah, that's what I
that.
was saying was, can you put it on the list of things to consider?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have some questions about A through G, but Dr. Promo, can I just make an appointment to talk to you about them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect, thank you.
I have a question. It's
Yeah,
Charlene.
Hi, Charlene.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, and you?
I'm good.
Okay, good. I'm wondering about, I know we've talked about this over the years, but the 5,000 for gate, is there any way to put more money towards that?
Robin, help me with how this applies to LCAP.
Yeah, so those gate funds this year were primarily directed towards helping teachers that were teaching gate students for the first time, and specifically working with them on social emotional supports for gate students, which is a priority area for us when it comes to our gate population and the crossover of those gate students with these unduplicated pupil populations. So to put that in more layman's terms and be more specific, we really wanted to target some professional development and support for our teachers in helping students that are gate, but also low socioeconomic status, foster youth, homeless, or English learners, and helping them flourish in the classroom and flourish in the gate environment or those gate activities. So that's what we did with that work this year. We're looking at expanding it for next year, because again, this year, the focus was a lot of our teachers that were teaching gate students for the first time. We did make it an optional activity for our veteran teachers who have been teaching gate for multiple years, but we have some ideas in mind on how to bring some more things to the table for all of our teachers that are teaching our gate students.
So Charlene, what I would also add is that when you're talking about LCAP dollars, we need to be focused on our targeted subgroups, and GATE is not part of that. So
But there are students within the gate population that are part of those targeted subgroups.
That are special ed, yes.
Well, there are free and reduced lunch kids that are gate. There are ELD kids that are gate. There are special ed kids that are gate. Not all of them. I mean, not the whole population, but there are kids from those targeted groups that also fall in the gate population, correct?
Yes, there are. That is absolutely correct. And that is why we put the professional development within the LCAP plan for sure. I guess what I'm curious about is I'm curious about what you want to see funded for GATE through LCAP dollars specifically.
I think more of what you did put the money towards. I feel like when teaching, I think teachers need a lot of support when dealing with gate kids, and I'm trying to say this right. I don't always feel like they have enough support in order to teach gate the way they may wish to. And so
Sure.
that's why I'm just wondering.
No, that's totally valid. I was just curious to know what other things you might be considering. So yeah, I mean, if we have extra dollars to put towards professional development, that seems appropriate to me. I guess what I'm worried about is the fact that it looks like we're at a deficit based on what we have currently funded for the next year. And so while I would love to look at like what else can we add, it seems to me like we're looking at where else can we put some we look at where we can cut.
Robin, you had mentioned that that staff had some ideas about ways to enhance the GATE professional development. Will those ideas be shared at the next GATE meeting, or when would parents find out about those ideas?
Yeah, I can work with Terry Williamson on that, but the main idea was to take what we did this year and expand it and try to provide that to all teachers, or make it I wouldn't say compulsory, but get more participation from our teachers that have been teaching GATE multiple years.
Okay.
But I also wanted to emphasize too that there's other funds available. So just because they're not LCAP or supplemental funds, there's some other options to be able to fund some of that work for our GATE teachers and students.
I'd love to bring up musical instruments, but I know there's money already there, and
yeah, and I
know that we're cutting and not adding, but
right, and I did
I'll throw it out there anyways.
I didn't include, there are some general funded items in the LCAP, but I didn't include them tonight because we're just looking at the supplemental budget, the items that are funded through supplemental funds. But we do have GATE testing and identification is an item that's in our LCAP, but general fund. And also what you just mentioned, the musical instruments.
Can you explain, I know there are some things that are in the plan that are funded out of the general fund. I'm just curious why. I mean, I like the information. It helps keep us more informed. I'm just trying to understand why those are also included.
It depends. So sometimes those items are in there because they're sort of a checklist item that the county or the state requires. So one item that shows up in there but it's not supplemental funded is our base program for special education, or personnel administrators and staffing. So sometimes they're listed in there just for that reason of it's a requirement or a sort of a checklist item that needs to be included in our plan. And there's other items that were put in previous years LCAPs that have carried over. So I can't necessarily, I'm not necessarily the one to speak to those. So I don't know if Peter or Sharon have any background for some of those items that.
And there might be some items also that are kept in the LCAP supplemental plan because grants expect to see that in an LCAP, even though they may not be LCAP supplemental funded, but they want to see it listed as a part of the LCAP. It's a general fund, just like with school plans. They want to see some, oftentimes with grants in the fine arts area, they want to see a fine arts goal or a fine arts section of action items that we reference when we do a grant application.
Okay. Is the state going to be asking for information on Prop 28 money once they give us Prop
Yes.
28?
Oh yeah.
Will that be part of the LCAP or separate?
Separate.
Okay.
So going back to what John was saying about mentioning, yes, it's not really a carryover, we're actually at a deficit. Will you be just showing how you may have to cut things at a later date, or what you're going to do with that? How you're going to work through that deficit?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll have our estimated actuals, or what we look to close the books on this year at the May meeting when we do our town hall with the school board. That'll give us a better idea. They'll also be able to provide us an update on projected revenues and enrollment for next year. So we'll have better or more some numbers that we hope are a little more real accurate to what we will see next year. And that's that meeting in May. So this is against second interim. Really, these numbers were put together in March. That's when our fiscal team does that. So that's when that conversation will occur. We do have some vacancies, like I said earlier, that are probably going to remain open. So we could see some savings this year still if those positions remain vacant. One of the situations we could look at for next year, if in May we still see we're going to be running a deficit next year, is to allow those vacancies to remain unfilled to help us balance our budget. But again, I'm going to go back to that slide. The estimated expenditures for next year is what it would cost to run every action item at full capacity if every position was filled. So those are two variables that we still need to account for or could plan on. And then the other piece would be to not necessarily remove or not fund an action item, but to reduce funding in some areas. So one example of that could be our summer school programs that we may be able to absorb some of that cost because it's split funded from year to year in the future plan, or we may see that because summer school really doesn't occur until June, that we're able to reduce some of the costs associated with summer school to be able to try to balance next year's budget as well.
Or we
I
might find some grants, possibly some grants.
True. So that is one of the items that's listed here and probably included in our budgeted expenditures for next year is the elementary summer school extended learning for English learners. That Peter wanted to verify, but that item we feel like should come off and be potential savings. Yeah.
I'm picking that up through the Expanded Learning Opportunities Program, ELOP. That's how we pay for our elementary summer school, because we have to provide like 30 days of extended year as a requirement of ELOP. So we're doing 25 days of summer school for elementary, and then we just completed 5 days over spring break in collaboration with Boys and Girls Club and YMCA as a part of that program. So
the other thing was I'd mentioned earlier, but it might have just kind of fell in the conversation, was that we are seeing a increase since the beginning of the year in our unduplicated population. So we are really hoping that trend continues through the end of the year and over the summer with any new enrollments, that we could see an increase in the revenues for next year that may be able to offset some of this. And I know 400,000 seems like a lot, but when we're dealing with a $12 million budget, that's a pretty small fraction. So if there's a lot of small changes could add up to making that balance work. Caroline.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Robin. I just want to add that as it pertains to summer school, we're starting to see after the pandemic a little bit of a reduction in terms of the kids who need to do credit recovery. So we could find savings in that we don't have as large a population of credit recovery possibly. The other part is that we have many platforms during the summer, platforms that are WASC accredited and UC approved for kids to do as initial credit. Therefore, we can recommend those to students who want to do initial credit, and we don't have to provide that as a summer school class and save money there. So I feel like there are mechanisms within summer school to help close this gap of a negative balance of $401,538 that is really reasonable.
So I just wanted to say, I have a question about something else, but on that, the summer school programs, I know that a list went out to the kids at the 2 high schools with all those options, and it was a really impressive list. So whoever put it together, good job. My question is, and I don't know that this applies to LCAP or the general fund, but with the concern about security in the last few weeks, a number of parents have brought up the possible need for more yard supervisors. And if that can be put on a list somewhere for consideration out of whatever fund that comes out of. I've heard that a lot lately.
Yeah,
We
thank you
we
for,
can add that to the list. I think it's just a matter of how we present that in terms of LCAP.
yeah, thanks for sharing that as well.
Right, and we can certainly take that back to our leadership team for further discussion to look for other ways for funding for that as well.
I would add too, and kind of transitioning to our last slide here, that I know that that's also a priority of our board. And so when we do our town hall meeting with them in May, that'll probably be a part of the conversation of how we maintain or increase the school safety and use the LCAP as a conduit for that. But that is the plan going forward. So our next steps would be to schedule and have that meeting. It's to be determined, but it's usually the 1st or 2nd week of May. As soon as we have that date set with our board, we'll publish that on the LCAP website, and we'll also send out an e-blast alert with information so you guys can mark your calendars. I anticipate that that's going to be an in-person meeting, not a virtual meeting when we do that town hall. So again, we'll get that information out as soon as it's set. At that time, we'll be able to do an update on our expenditures and feel pretty close to accurate on where we are going to end the year on all of these items. We'll also have an update on our projected revenues for next year at that time. So we'll have a clearer picture of what we can anticipate for carryover, as well as a clearer picture of what we anticipate revenues for next year. We'll also be able to determine any other costs or increase in costs when it comes to pay rate with our bargaining units. We should have a clear picture on that by that time as well. The final 2 steps, though, for the LCAP after our May meeting is to do a presentation to our school board on June 15th as part of a regular scheduled school board meeting, and then final adoption on the 22nd of June. So those are the next steps. I think there'll be a lot of discussion with our school board. It's a town hall meeting, so it's a different format for everyone to be able to speak and give input. And we'll have some more numbers to look at then. We will definitely bring any of the suggested items from tonight's meeting to that meeting as ideas that were already brought forward. But again, part of that meeting could be just more of a discussion about where we need to reduce some funding, or where we need to identify some savings as opposed to where we are increasing. With that, I want to open it up for any other questions or any other thoughts that came out of tonight's presentation and discussion. So tonight's video and the presentation's already available on our LCAP website. I will be posting the video of tonight's presentation and discussion as well on our LCAP website. As soon as we have that date set with our school board, we'll be sharing that, and that'll be our next opportunity to discuss. In between now and then, if there's any other thoughts or things that come up, either because you participated tonight or because you're viewing this video on our website, please feel free to reach out to any of us on this panel or this instructional services team. I want to thank Sharon Caseo, Dr. John Paramo, and Dr. Peter Kanavik for joining us tonight, sharing their insights about our plan. And those are the people that you can contact, as well as myself, Robin Anders, at the school district in regards to any thoughts or concerns or comments you'd like to share. So with that, appreciate everyone joining tonight, and I'll go ahead and close out this meeting unless there's any other thoughts or questions that you'd like to share or ask. Great. So thank you again and have a good evening.
Thank you.